This is a nice long article by Hannah Ritchie, who is the lead researcher for Our World in Data, which is a fantastic resource, and she's at Oxford, and it's about why climate doomerism is wrong. They have a series of articles in this, and it's called another one is called "We Need the Right Kind of Climate Optimism." That's the same article captioned differently. Optimism is the only thing that works, but only if we don't assume that progress is inevitable. Uh, Optimism doesn't mean complacency, right? So, are you going to be dark or are you going to be sunshine and rainbows? I have railed against climate alarmism elsewhere already because I don't like climate scientists, including myself, always saying things are only going to get worse. So something bad happens, like the Wayanad landslide, instead of saying why it happened, instead of seeing whether we predicted right, what was missed from before, and so on, we say, well, watch out, this will only get worse. But will it again happen exactly the same way at Wayanad? Not likely. So we have to be very careful. And then I also track these headlines that keep saying this may happen, that may happen, which with so many things already happening, why are we raising more and more flags about what may happen? What do we need to do about things that are already happening? So the 1.5 degree obsession is one of those things. Here it says on August 3rd, 2023, world has first real taste of life at 1.5 degrees Celsius, about above pre-industrial times. This is a bit nonsensical because it's not like you cross 1.5 and everything starts to happen. It has to stay there for some time. How long is it going to stay there? We are likely to come back. And then this says world likely to breach 1.5 degrees C climate threshold by 2027. And then New York Times says Earth to hit critical global warming threshold by early 2030s. And then there is more news. Warmer seas might be clouding their brains for damselfish in distress. Cute headline, but what are we going to do with these kind of, if you keep on telling people everything is going wrong, they may just give up. It's fight or flight, freeze. What are they supposed to do? And this is really, really bad. Gulf Stream could collapse as early as 2025, study suggests. Whether the newspaper amplified it in a wrong way or the scientists actually said it, this is just scientifically wrong. We have no way of saying this with any confidence whatsoever. Just wrong, right? And there are also times when you hype things. Was Hurricane Hillary overhyped? It wasn't unprecedented, but warnings likely saved lives. So are we taking end justifies the means kind of approach? That means we lose credibility. So have to be careful. And then there is the general alarmism. Climate pessimism dooms us to a terrible future. Complacent optimism is no better. That's the another title for this article I'm going to read. It's long, so maybe I'll make it. I'll do two podcasts. And the other article in this series says the doomers are wrong about humanity's future and its past. The necessity of progress. Vox is a good outlet, credible, legitimate, and salient points are made. So you always have to be careful when somebody says necessity of progress. Is it the oil company? So you have to be always careful what is being sold. We environmentalists, this is going back to Hannah Ritchie's article on why climate doomerism is wrong, or why we need optimism. We environmentalists spend our lives thinking about ways the world will end. There's nowhere that I see doomer culture more vocal than on my home turf. She's at Oxford, with leading activists like Roger Hallam, co-founder of the popular climate protest movement Extinction Rebellion, telling young people that they face annihilation. It's no surprise so many of them feel terrified. I did a 3-hour short course on climate for the extinction. Well, I did it for extinction anyway. In a large recent international survey on youth attitudes towards climate change, More than half said that humanity is doomed, and 3/4 said the future is frightening. Young people have good reasons to worry about our ability to tackle climate change, but this level of despair should be alarming to anyone who cares about the well-being of future generations, which is after all what the climate movement is all about. You are trying to help the future generations, and you cannot share the hell out of them. As the lead researcher of our world in data, an organization that aims to make data on the world's biggest problems accessible and understandable, I have written extensively on the reasons to be optimistic about the future. She has a book, in fact. The price of solar and wind power, as well as of batteries for storing low carbon energy, have all plunged. Global deforestation peaked decades ago and has been slowly declining. Sales of new gas and diesel cars are now falling. Coal is starting to die in many countries, economically not feasible anymore. We'll still be burning coal for a while, China, India, for example. Government commitments are getting closer to limiting global warming to 2 degrees C, optimistic. Deaths from natural disasters, despite what news about climate change related fires and hurricanes might appear to suggest, are a fraction of what they used to be. The list goes on about this, and progress can be counted in many ways as well, and climate action, disaster management, etc. But here I don't want to talk about whether pessimism is accurate. I want to focus on whether it's useful. People might defend doomsday scenarios as the wake-up call that society needs. If they are exaggerated, so what? They might be the crucial catalysts that gets us to act on climate change. So this is the end justifies the means approach, which is never good, honestly. Setting aside the moral problem of stretching the truth, this claim is wrong. Scaring people into action does not work. That's true not just for climate change, air pollution and biodiversity loss, but for almost any issue we can think of. We need optimism to make progress, yet that alone isn't enough. To contend with environmental crises and make life better for everyone, we need the right kind of optimists, those who recognize that the world will only improve if we fight for it. So I have talks on how climate change is a crisis but also an opportunity, and I don't even like the word crisis. I call it a challenge. Climate change is a challenge and it's an opportunity, because crisis is kind of a fake word we are using because we are all living a normal life. Climate scientists who keep saying climate crisis are just living fine, right? A framework for bringing about societal change, then, to understand what sort of thinking does drive positive change, we can imagine a framework for how people conceptualize the future and their ability to shape it. Credit where it's due, I first saw a version of this concept in the venture capitalist Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1. He presented it in the context of entrepreneurship, but it tied perfectly with my experiences in the environmental space, and I have adapted it, says Hannah Ritchie. My framework has 2 axes. On one axis, we have a level of optimism spanning from optimistic to pessimistic. She's a scientist after all. People who think the future will be much better are at the one end, and those who think it'll be much worse are on the other. On the other axis, we have changeability. This reflects how much people think the future can be shaped by the decisions we make today. People who think the world is changeable believe they have an agency to mold it, which means you are willing and able to act. While those who think it's unchangeable believe we are on a predetermined path and that trying to shape the future is futile. So level of optimism from low to high, and how much the world can be shaped from cannot be changed to can be changed completely. This gives us 4 quadrants, but only one really matters for our purposes. The optimistic and changeable box is where people who move the world forward fall. We need more people in there. None of the other quadrants are effective. By exploring the characteristics of each person, we'll see why. Optimistic and pessimistic, we are doomed and need to take extreme action to protect ourselves. Pessimistic, and we are doomed and there is nothing we can do about it. Optimistic, the future can be better if we work hard to change it. The future will be better. It'll all work out fine. So you don't want people who think they're optimistic, but they're complacent. That's not what we are looking for. Okay, pessimists doom most of humanity to a terrible future. Pessimists in the lower right hand quadrant, those who think the future is not changeable, are the true doomers. Their position is that we are screwed and there's nothing we can do about it. I used to be one. After completing several degrees in environmental science and following the climate movement closely for years, I became submerged by helplessness at the scale of the environmental problems we face. Despite it being my lifelong passion, I was ready to turn my back on the field and work on something else. The idea that I could do anything had been slowly beaten out of me. Unchangeable pessimists have given up on the sorry for mucking up the reading. Unchangeable pessimists have given up on agitating for change and experience high levels of anxiety and despondency. But it's important to realize that not all levels of anxiety are equal or equally arresting. Research shows that some anxiety can be a strong predictor of positive, constructive action, which is what I tend to fall into, because I am obviously worried about climate change, but I keep on thinking there are ways we can tackle this. It can be a signal that we are unhappy with how things are and give us an initial trigger to act, but it's useless unless combined with hope that things really can get better, and I think they will get better. What unchangeable pessimists feel is paralyzing anxiety. That's a horrible place to be in emotionally, but it's also an ineffective one. It's also an ineffective one. Again, sorry. It prevents people from actually going out and doing things to mitigate climate change. There is a second flavor of pessimism, those in the lower left-hand quadrant of our framework who are resigned to a doomed future but think that rather than do nothing, we must prepare for the inevitable. So here we are doomed and need to take extreme action to protect ourselves. These are kind of people who lock themselves up in fortified underground dwellings with lots of weapons because they thought terrorists will take over America and so on and so forth. Okay, so look again. We are doomed and need to take extreme action to protect ourselves, so they think it's changeable but pessimistic. And here, pessimistic but unchangeable. We are doomed and there's nothing we can do about it. And optimistic and not changeable. The future will be better. It'll work out fine. So things can go on as they are, but nothing to worry about. So that's mostly complacency or foolishness or foolish optimism. Irrational optimism, whatever you want to call it. And here is the quadrant we love, optimistic and changeable. The future can be better if we work hard to change it. So right, so we were here. This group is just anxious as the unchangeable pessimists. That is the group that is the second flavor of pessimism. Those in the lower left-hand quadrant of our framework who are resigned to a doomed future but think that rather than do nothing, we must prepare for the inevitable. This group is just as anxious as the unchangeable pessimists, but rather than being despondent, they become self-serving and indignant. They do all they can to protect themselves and whatever morsels of a livable planet are left. Changeable pessimists promote extreme and divisive environmental solutions that are unrealistic and would leave many far worse off. Extinction Rebellion, for example, has called for the UK to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. This is unrealistic just in terms of technological feasibility. It's undeniable that the UK has to reduce its emissions rapidly, but many scientists agree that a 2025 deadline would be unworkable and damaging because we don't have replacements ready to fill the energy gap anyways. An immediate boycott of fossil fuels would result in a humanitarian disaster because the world overwhelmingly relies on them to meet everyday energy needs. This way of thinking doesn't rationally weigh the costs and benefits of trying to radically reduce our resource use overnight. It's not like the Extinction Rebellion is free of fossil fuels anyways. They just say change the system. It represents a kind of self-preservation for people in affluent countries. Rather than looking outward to build international cooperation, it pushes countries and communities to look inward and think about themselves. At its extreme, changeable pessimism is susceptible to the sort of ideas advanced by biologist Paul Ehrlich, who has been predicting environmental collapse due to human overpopulation for over half a century. The Malthusian catastrophe never happened because of green revolution, and now fertility rates are dropping and population will begin to drop at some point. It's an approach that assumes against our past experience that it's impossible for humans to overcome perceived environmental limits and that we have to impose devastating austerity instead. It would sacrifice the well-being of some of the poorest people on the planet who need both growth and energy. This is no way to solve global challenges, but it's an inevitable outcome of a scarcity mindset. Okay, apologies for all the misreadings. So let me leave this here because we'll come back and turn to the optimists. This is already 16 minutes long, so let's do another podcast to conclude this nice article by Hannah Ritchie in the Vox. There is a book, so you can follow up as well.